Hello, my name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I'm the Chief Economist here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Thank you for joining us today for our event, A Hand Up, Helping Our Fellow Texans Succeed. Hope you're having a wonderful Thursday. We've got a great group here that's going to have a lively discussion about some of the key things that are affecting Texas and really affecting the rest of the nation. One of the things that we've really been working on here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation is how to help those who maybe might fall through the cracks in the future without a proper education and the skills to get that job, full-time job over time. Maybe some of those who have already fallen through the cracks for whatever reason it may be. How can we better help to get them on a place, on a path to earn a pathway to permanent self-sufficiency? Those are the type of things that we want to talk about today with our Opportunity Project, where it really falls under three big buckets, where improving workforce development. And so we'll have some good discussion about that here today. We're also talking about reducing barriers to entrepreneurship. We can think about getting jobs and starting your own business and, occupational licensing. Some of those that are not being able to get a job until they get some of these hours and pay a fee for the license that's on there. And then finally, reforming the social safety nets that are here in Texas. When you think of things like TANF and SNAP and WIC and other sort of programs where we're thinking about, you may have heard of as welfare or even, quote unquote, entitlements. Those are the types of social safety nets that we want to discuss here today, where all these things are providing a pathway to self-sufficiency, dignity, and prosperity. Overall, as many of y'all know, I usually talk a lot about let people prosper. And I think this is a way that we can think about that in terms of what's happening with so many people across the state. Ultimately, what we want to do is provide the most prosperous state and institutional framework that's going to allow for people to have jobs, put food on their table, take care of their families, and have a robust retirement, as we all do, right? We want the best for our families and our kids and our grandkids. And I think we're going to have a great discussion about that here today. So let me introduce our great panelists, my colleagues here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. The first is Erin Valdez. She is a policy analyst for our Next Generation Texas campaign here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Next, we will have Andrew Brown, who is the Distinguished Senior Fellow of Child and Family Policy here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And then we also have Richard Johnson, who is Director of our Booker T. Washington Initiative here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. They are a great group. They are happy warriors, and they've got a lot to talk about. But we're going to talk about the problems that we see in these different areas today. What's going on in the Texas Capitol that they're currently working on, and then maybe what are some of the other initiatives that should come up in the future. So let's get this party started, if you will. All right. The first thing we want to talk about is developing workforce skills and the things that are going on in this particular area. So I'd first like to turn it over to Erin Valdez. Hi, Erin. Erin, how's it going?
It's going really well. Thank you for having me on today. Really appreciate this opportunity to talk about all of these interconnected issues and some of the ways that we're thinking about it here at the foundation. So my background is as a teacher, and so it makes sense that as we were thinking through some of the issues that face us as Texans in terms of workforce and skills, that starts somewhere. The skills gap starts somewhere. So this has been talked about for a while, that as baby boomers are retiring, many folks who have hands-on skills in things like HVAC, plumbing, electrical, other really important jobs that involve technical knowledge. These jobs are going unfilled. And frankly, a lot of folks that are in those professions, and I talk with a lot of them because my dad is an HVAC guy, what they're talking about is they don't have any young people coming in as apprentices to learn the trades. And this is deeply concerning to them. And we're also seeing this, in a really stark way in the wake of Winter Storm Uri, which shut down our state for a good week or so last month. The Texas Tribune highlighted this issue, talking about the fact that this skilled trades gap has been about a decade in the making. And what did this look like? This looked like there weren't enough plumbers to fix all the broken pipes. in a timely way. And a lot of people are actually still suffering from that. There weren't electricians to fix things like, electrical lines within apartment complexes and homes. So this had a direct negative impact on a lot of folks and really highlighted the issue. And so as we're going back and looking through, well, how did this happen? I think there's a couple of things. One of them is, I think, again, public policy can sometimes have unintended consequences. In the 90s and early 2000s, there was a push for college for all. And the idea was, since there is such a premium to going to college in terms of the money you make over a lifetime, if we viewed college as an anti-poverty sort of solution, well, then everybody should go to college, and then everybody can make a lot of money, and then problem solved, right? Mm-hmm. So it came from a good place, right? The issue, though, that we're starting to see is that a lot of students were told, hey, go to college, and that's the secure path to prosperity. A lot of them are now in student loan debt that they can't pay off because they, for whatever reason, couldn't complete their college degree. A lot of kids are not interested in going on to take academic classes. And so the message they're getting is you're a loser because you didn't go. And then of course, in terms of our workforce, there aren't enough people to do these really high skilled, high wage, high demand jobs. And so the federal government has taken some steps on this, and the state has taken some steps on this. Recent data released by the Texas Education Agency reveals that of 82,000 students who completed a program of study in high school, which is a sequence of courses that are stacked and connected to a topic, of that 82,000 students in 2018, 2019, only about 103, that's not percent, that's total number, completed a program of study in HVAC, and that's less than 0.1%. About the same number completed a course of study in plumbing, and then a little bit more than that, about 0.2%, completed a course of study in welding. So we've got a problem. It starts at the secondary level, and I think that there are some solutions that can be brought to bear to highlight skilled trades and the pathways that they can provide all students.
Wow, that's something else, Erin, just thinking about the number of people who aren't going into those areas, right, even as they have shortages and right, the need for them out there. And so I look forward to diving into that a little bit more throughout this live stream, because those are some important stats, some really eye-opening stats, really, of what we're looking at and what we're facing in Texas and many places across the nation. So thank you for that. Andrew, I'd like to turn it over to you next. I know you've done a lot of work on child welfare and CPS, foster care, things of that nature. And something that we've been working on more here now is on safety net reform in general. And you've really been leading the way on this. And one thing that we've talked about, and even earlier today, we were talking about it, how we're trying to redefine the narrative about this. Because I think to those of us on the right, it's been about, well, we're just cutting programs, or we're trying to remove this overall. And that's not the case, right? I mean, what you and I like to talk a lot about is that we're using scarce taxpayer dollars more wisely, more efficiently, to go to those people that the program is intended, so that they can get on a path to earn permanent self-sufficiency. And so I just like to know what you see as the problems of where we're at, in Texas, and some other things that you're looking at, and so we can get a better idea of where we're at, so that way we can know where we're going to go.
Right. And the failure of the social safety net has been a perennial item of discussion across the board, but particularly within conservative circles, because we're so focused on this idea of promoting self-sufficiency and empowering and promoting the dignity of those who may be struggling to make ends meet. But the problem itself is one of both policy as well as culture. And that's an area that I've really been digging into a lot recently. Just to start on the policy side of things, the way that our social safety net system is structured is characterized by misalignments of incentives and inefficient programs. When I say misalignment of incentives, success in a lot of these programs is measured by how many people are being served, period. Rather than where it should be measured is how many people are we moving to self-sufficiency, and how many are staying self-sufficient and not coming back onto these programs. The social safety net, we use this term because that's exactly what we want to envision, right? The safety net catches you and then you get out of it. You don't stay in it. But the way that government has structured these programs is, a colleague of mine used to say, the safety net becomes a hammock, or even a net that you become trapped in. I think net is probably a better term, because it conveys this truth that our neighbors in need are becoming trapped in these programs that are intended to help them and intended to help them move to self-sufficiency. Another major area of problem on the policy side is the mismanagement of the programs by government. The Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, or TANF by shorthand, is one of the prime examples of this. Right now, states receive taxpayer dollars from the federal government under TANF in a block grant, which gives states a lot of flexibility on how to spend that. Now, they're supposed to be spending it to meet 4 goals, and those goals are enabling children to be raised in their own home instead of the homes of or in the homes of relatives, ending welfare dependence by increasing work and marriage, reducing out of wedlock pregnancies, and increasing family formation. These are all goals that I think we agree are important for us as a society to be prioritizing. Well, the problem is the flexibility provided within TANF has resulted in states abusing taxpayer dollars and spending that money on things that are entirely unrelated to those core goals, or even to just fill budget gaps. This year, especially with the economic downturn from COVID, states are trying to make up budget ground. In Texas, there were 5% cuts across the board for many of our agencies. And there's a major temptation to raid that TANF piggy bank and to make up some of those budget gaps, rather than making sure that that money, those scarce taxpayer dollars, are actually going to help those in need. One example of that, you mentioned that my focus is on the child welfare system. About a third of the TANF dollars that the state of Texas receives go to our child welfare system. And of that money, over half is spent on salaries, information technology, and other administrative expenses, rather than going to help those families that are at risk of being separated by our foster care system. It's especially troubling to me because we know that the majority of kids who enter foster care are entering because of neglect. And there is a statistically significant relationship between allegations of neglect and poverty. So if you are a family in Texas living in one of the 25 poorest counties, you're statistically more likely to have contact with Child Protective Services due to an allegation of neglect than if you live in one of the 25 wealthiest counties. And the fact that TANF dollars are being spent to pay for overhead in a system rather than helping families who are struggling with poverty, I think is a major issue that needs to be addressed. But it's not just a policy solution. We always like to say that policy is downstream of culture, and the policy problems that we're talking about are directly related to some cultural drift that's been happening. And it's no coincidence that the cultural drift that I'm talking about coincides with the creation of the modern safety net state, or the war on poverty. During the 1960s, that cultural revolution that happened was marked by a dramatic shift to an individualistic or self-focused orientation. And as a result of this, people disconnected from their communities and key social institutions like places of worship, that had traditionally been the primary sources that people would turn to during times of crisis. And that vacuum got filled by the state. They took over this social safety net, and many of those issues that we're seeing with the inefficiencies are directly related to the impersonal nature of the social safety net program when it's run by government versus when it's run by civil society itself. And so we need to get back to this understanding, or a culture of a we versus a me, to borrow from the great Rabbi Jonathan Sachs.
Yeah, well put, Andrew. It reminds me of Milton Friedman, who said, "Don't judge a policy by its intentions, but by its results. And when we look back, that's something that we certainly need to take into consideration for the expansion of those social safety nets, and whether or not they're actually hitting the people and helping the people, that those dollars are going to those people that they really are intended. And so I look forward to following up with some questions that I have for you here in a minute. But I'd like the next turn to Richard. I know that you've reached out to some of these people that are more in the community, that have been maybe on some of these programs, and heard many of the stories that they've told you about how they got into that situation, whether they may have been falling through the cracks at some point and they could maybe see that in the future, but didn't have the resources to help them out, or they may have fallen into the cracks somehow, and maybe don't necessarily know how to get out. And there's a lot of resources, but there's not that community involvement as well. So I'd love to get your thoughts on some of the problems that you see and where we should start to head.
Thank you so much, Vance, and coming behind my two colleagues. I really appreciate their brain span on workforce development and social safety nets. I mean, it makes it really easy for me to step in and just kind of talk a little bit about what I've experienced in dealing with folks out in the community. But I had an old professor who used to tell me always, you begin with the end in mind. And at the end of the day, what are these social safety nets all about? What is workforce development all about? It's about opening the door and creating pathways to the great American dream. And the way that we achieve the great American dream in America is three words, work, jobs. And so basically, when we talk about social safety nets, that came about in 1935. And I'm sure that FDR had no idea to use my colleague Erin's word, that the unintended consequences of that policy would lead to dependency on the system. The idea behind, after the stock market crash and the Great Depression, was to create an opportunity to help people, give folks a hand up and not folks a hand out. And that's our whole focus today, is to talk about how do we give folks a hand up and not a hand out, and then how do we deal with the inefficiencies of the current system and safety net system that basically, creates a culture of dependency. I once had a very close friend, and he and I were sitting down one day and we were chatting. And I, as two guys said, I say, I know you've been dating this young lady for a long time. When are you guys going to get married? And my friend said, well, I've asked her repeatedly, I proposed repeatedly, and she's turned me down. I said, well, how long have you guys been together? She said, we've been together for 19 years. And we currently, she had 4 children when we first got married. Now we have a child who's now 19. And I said, well, Jesus, man, when are you guys going to get married? And he says, well, the whole deal is, she said that if she married me, she would lose her benefits. She would lose her TANF benefits. And I said, she would lose her TANF benefits. Is that the only thing that's preventing you? What about love, marriage, family, building your family, building a community, building a nation? He says, it's not about love, man. I don't make enough money. And if we get married, then she would automatically lose housing. She'd lose all these other TANF benefits that she has. And that's the reason why she says no. So the unfortunate thing about this, Vance, is all too many of our American, our American citizens are living in that type of situation. And it's not a safety net, it is a net. And they find themselves trapped in that particular net and cannot get out. Unfortunately, it's hit the African American community extremely hard, because right now, according to the census, only 38% of the children under 18 are growing up in a two-parent household. And then also 70% of the newborn babies are being born to single mothers. And so when we talk about, where is the, African-American community? Well, community starts with family. So if the family is broken, then the community is broken. You can't, strong families build strong communities. Strong communities build strong cities, states, and the nation. And so I think we're on the right track with some of the legislation that we're supporting. HB 1516, efficiency audits, and you'll hear a lot about that coming from my colleague Andrew, because we need to know whether or not the system is being efficient in terms of focusing in on the outcomes, not how many people I can bring into the program, but how many people I can graduate off of the program into self-sufficiency, into self-determination, and into self-reliance. That's what Booker T. Washington is all about. Most people don't know that 100 buildings on Tuskegee University was built by the students. So Booker T. Washington was all about workforce development, trade and skill building. Yes, you can be a great author and write many books. Yes, you can be an architect. Yes, you can be a lawyer, a doctor, but you're also going to know how to lay a foundation. You're also going to know how to lay some bricks. You're also going to develop skills. That's what Booker T. Washington was all about. And most of our entrepreneurship comes out of the crafts. If most of the times when we have a person that owns a plumbing business, most of the time they were plumbers. And we have people who own trucking companies. Most of the time they started out driving a truck. And so that's where our entrepreneurial spirit is. That's where we need to really get in and support HB 1516, HB 1032, which is our paid internships, paid apprenticeships bill. You'll hear a lot of that as we go on in the program from Erin. But without these things, we cannot unleash the American spirit and American innovation and entrepreneurship. Thank you for allowing me to share and bringing me on to the live stream with you.
Well put, Richard, as usual. And I think you've gave us a lot of things to think about as we go through the rest of this discussion here. I did want to let our audience know that if you have any questions, please post those in the comment section, and we will make sure to get to those here shortly before the end of our live stream here. So please post your questions. Erin, when I'm thinking about some of the things that Andrew and Richard were talking about and the different policies and everything, I can't but remember and recall where we were in 2019 before the pandemic happened. I mean, when you're thinking about the labor market and everything else, I mean, we had an unemployment rate of 3.5% nationally, right about that here in Texas. So people could get a job if they wanted one, essentially. But what we also found is that there were more job openings across the country and even in Texas than there were people who were unemployed, right? Meaning that there were a lot of openings, a lot of maybe mismatches, what we call them in economics, the skills mismatch that's going on. And I'm just wondering from your vantage point and the research that you've done and looked at, how can we start to fill some of those gaps and bridge that overall? And what are some of the policy areas that you're looking at this session to start heading things in that direction?
That's a really great question, Vance. I like the way you framed that. Part of the reason we're in the boat we're in really touches on things that my colleagues have brought up. The first one I want to just point out has to do with, we've been looking at inputs rather than outputs in education. And I think that's a very, very costly mistake. And I'll talk about that in a second, about why I think that is and what we're doing on that. The other piece comes from this idea of sort of politics or downstream from culture. And I really want to emphasize that I think that this skilled trades gap that we talk about, that you mentioned, Vance, the fact that we've got all these jobs available in what we used to call the skilled trades, versus the number of people taking them has something to do with a cultural attitude that tells young people, and I'm going to be blunt here, especially young men, that these are not as dignified as other ways of earning a living. And I think that's just a plain bald-faced lie. It's not true, but we've bought into it. And I think part of this is pushing back hard against that cultural narrative, right? That there's the best kind of life is a kind of life where you don't work with your hands, right? And to what, what Dr. Johnson said, I think is really important here. It's not an either or. Learning to work with your hands and having a skilled trade does not mean that you can't read, write, be articulate, have professional interests aside from that, or even just, hobby interests outside of that. And I think if you look back at our founding generation, you saw Renaissance men and women, right? People who could do multiple different things at once. You can walk and chew gum at the same time. So I think there's this cultural problem where we've separated vocational or CTE education from what we used to call the liberal arts education so starkly. And by the way, that's reflected in the way that funding works for vocational education in Texas, that we think that it's an either or path, that students are going to be locked into some pathway they can't get off of if we encourage them to explore the skilled trades at younger ages. So I just really want to emphasize, I think there's a cultural issue here that's amplified by some policy things that happen at the state and federal level, but it starts with that. And then I also want to emphasize that I think that the outcomes piece is super important. So when we're thinking about vocational education, it has a pretty straightforward value proposition. In other words, if you're learning how to weld, the outcome of that should be that you can weld, not that you can tap dance. So the idea here would be, look, if we're going to spend money on vocational or CTE education in Texas, we ought to make sure that those dollars are going towards ensuring that individual students are finding those pathways to prosperity. So in Texas, we've got a couple of really interesting models that other states I think could look at and that Texas could definitely look at to build on. And one of them relates to this returned value funding model Texas State Technical College employs, which is it's a statewide technical school, public technical school in Texas. They've got a bunch of campuses, I think 16 campuses across the state. They're unique because they don't get paid by the state unless their students get a job after graduation. And as a result of this incentive structure, they work really closely with employers to ensure that the programs they're providing are actually aligned with the jobs that are open. I mean, imagine that, right? And so what we're trying to say is, look, that is a proven model. It's been effective since they implemented, I think, in 2013. They're one of the few 2-year colleges in the state that isn't suffering from the COVID slump in terms of community college enrollment. They're growing. There's something to learn there. There's something to pay attention to there. So I think in terms of our general overall policy lens on, apprenticeships and workforce, we think it needs to be, the employers need to have a strong hand in this. And they need to have the incentives to be involved in this, because ultimately, either students get a job or they don't, and it's pretty worthless to spend that money if students aren't actually finding good employment and maybe pathways even to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, Erin, that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, and ultimately, we want taxpayer dollars to be used wisely. Right. While at the same time, those who are using them, I mean, they need to meet their unique needs, right? Whatever those may be. And right. So we need to have more opportunities to do that. So I appreciate the work that you're doing with those and those words that you mentioned. We'll come back to that here in a little bit. We're already receiving some good questions in. So audience, please keep sending those in the comment section. And I think these tie in really well with what you're going to discuss probably next, Andrew. And these kind of go together. But how has the transition of TANF dollars moved over time? And has it ever been effective? Have that program been effective? And then how do we measure the effectiveness of social programs? What have been some of the areas that you've looked at in looking at these programs, TANF being one of them? And what can we do to see if they're effective?
Yeah, those are both great questions. And I think TANF is kind of the number one offender because of that shift into the block grant that I referenced earlier. One of the ways that we are working to solve that problem is through what we call an efficiency audit. So there's two bills right now in front of the Texas legislature. One is House Bill 1516 by Representative Parker. Its companion is Senate Bill 657 by Senator Springer. Both of these bills would require a regular efficiency audit of the TANF program as administered by the Health and Human Services Commission. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with the efficiency audit concept, the regular financial audits that you're probably aware of only look at how is money being spent and is it being spent properly and is it properly accounted for. There really aren't metrics around, are you getting results from the spending? The efficiency audit attempts to answer that question by looking at how money is being spent and then asking the question, is that investment actually generating the desired outcomes? It goes even further by identifying areas where you can improve processes, you can improve the efficiency of your spending to generate even better outcomes. It can identify areas where you're duplicating efforts. So you might have two agencies that are working on the same project or a similar project where if you consolidated that effort, you could get better results for less investment and then, enable that money to either be reinvested into better outcomes or go back to the taxpayers. I think I know where you would fall on that option, Vance, from our conversations. So this efficiency audit concept, and it's something that has been applied in a number of different areas. In Texas, we've applied it to school districts through House Bill 3, which was passed last session. Other states have applied it across the board in their child welfare systems, as well as a number of other government-style programs. Now, these only work if you take action on the recommendations. And so that's why we have made this a regular efficiency audit. So it's not just a one and done kind of thing. It's every 6 years, you go back and you do this audit to see, are you improving on the outcomes that you're generating? Have you implemented the recommendations from the last time? And if not, why not? And that will provide both an accountability structure as well as a way to measure the progress on making the TANF program more effective at moving people towards self-sufficiency and getting rid of some of the waste we discussed earlier, where money intended to help those in need is being redirected toward administrative expenses and things completely unrelated to helping those that the program is intended to help.
Yeah, well put, Andrew. I think those are going to be some excellent ways to not only provide more transparency of these programs. I mean, look, they may get in there and see that they're working better than we think. I hope that's the case. But if not, then we need to figure out how to take the next steps to improve these programs and really help out those to get to earn, that permanent self-sufficiency. I think that's so important instead of having them fall on the net, Richard, that you were talking about and having them stuck there overall. We've also been looking at other types of bills this session. When you think about House Bill 569, which would allow for credit whenever you're in confinement, if you have outstanding fines or something like that, or misdemeanor type cases, that would allow you to get a credit to overcome those fines, right? So that way when you, or there's other types of things where you can't get a driver's license if you were incarcerated. And then if you can't get a driver's license, well, what do? I mean, you can't go to work. It makes it more difficult to go to work. And so then you kind of get in this downward spiral of getting back into whatever it was that put you in jail or prison there before. And so I'm wondering about some of the experiences that you had. And this was what another question was from our audience members. Great questions. We love our audience. What are you doing to actively support crucial poverty reducing legislation that will impact communities both at home and abroad? And whatever I think about this, Richard, I think about some of the work that you've done with Bonton Farms and hearing their stories and some of the things that they were really interested in. And I think that has helped you to develop some of these policy ideas that would be poverty reducing, so it can help out communities and the individuals that it's hurting along the way.
Absolutely. Communities like Bonton are all over the nation. They're urban centers that basically, harbor poverty and all the things that go along with, a culture of poverty. The main thing is, are we incentivizing the policies that we write or the policies that we support? Are those policies incentivizing self-sufficiency and work and jobs? Because if an individual does not work and they don't have the skill sets to work and become self-sufficient, then there is no dignity. So when people are robbed of their dignity, they can fall into a net, which is not a safety net. I don't think it's a safety net. I think it's a net of poverty, and it creates a permanent underclass of people. It doesn't matter what color you are, what race you are. It's just whether or not you are incentivized to stay at the bottom, or whether or not you're incentivized to strive and move forward and make contributions to humanity. One of the things we saw at the focus groups there at the Bonton Farms was, information where every last one of the individuals in the focus group stated that they did not want to be no longer on safety net programs. However, in order for them to come off of the safety net, then they would have to actually probably move out of their housing, because these we call it the safety net cliff, if you will. If individuals make a certain level, reach a certain level of income, then they lose all of their benefits. However, the benefits, let's just give you, for instance, if they make $30,000 a year and they're receiving $50,000 a year in benefits, the average person would say, hey man, if you can make $30,000 a year, that's a good job for you. You don't need to be participating no more with this safety net program. But this person is actually receiving $50,000. You add in, hospitalization, you add in medical, you add in housing, you add in all those other benefits. This person is actually receiving about $50,000 worth of benefits. So what that person would do is they would decline a job making $30,000 a year, because they're getting more in safety net benefits. And so that locks them into that system. And one of the things, the biggest thing that I think that system robs them of is the family unit, building the family unit, building the family structure. One of the biggest challenges in the African-American community we're facing right now is fatherlessness, where fathers are not in the home. And be it old-fashioned as you may think it may be, but having both parents, all of our research shows us that having both parents in the household actually enhances the child's well-being in terms of their educational development, their social development, and their commitment to not just family, but community and to the nation. So we see these things happening in this system. Basically, is to answer the audience question, is it being effective? Yes, it's being effective in breaking down families. It's being effective in causing individuals to be dependent on the system. It's being effective in smothering innovation and killing the spirit of entrepreneurship among a large segment of our society. It's being effective at doing that. I think the ultimate question is it being effective in helping anybody? And that question is lingering on the table, pleading for an answer, seemingly, if you weigh the scales and say how much we're losing versus how much we're getting with the program. And that's the reason why I like the efficiency audits, because the efficiency audits will go in and tell us exactly where we are categorically and programmatically being efficient in terms of receiving outcomes. The outcomes are really helping people up and not helping people to stay at the bottom and become a part of this, continue to grow this permanent underclass. And to my colleague Erin's, to her point in terms of skills development and CTE, career technology education, the most important bill we have up there right now, I know there's a lot of stuff going on in America, but the most important bill that we have up there right now is House Bill 1032, because that bill incentivizes secondary education to build a more robust career technology education program. It incentivizes the students because then they're able to earn while they learn. It incentivizes industry because it makes them a true partner in that work-based learning team. And it also incentivizes community-based organizations because they play a role in that entire comprehensive group of people that's working to move not just the student, but move our communities forward. So with that being said, I think that we're on the right track. We have good policies and good legislation coming out of the 87th session, and we're backing some good policies. We just need to make sure we pass them and make it law.
Yeah, excellently put, Richard. I think that when you're looking at this session, there are a lot of good pieces of legislation that are out there. And I hope the audience, will take a look at some of those bills that's on their website. Texas Legislature Online is a good place to look at a lot of these bills and get some insights about what's going on out there. Overall, we've got a lot on our website as well at texaspolicy.com, where we're looking at the opportunity project that we're talking about today with a hand up, right, versus more handouts, and trying to get people to have more self-sufficiency and dignity and overall prosperity. One of the other research ideas that's been out there that makes a lot of sense has been the success sequence, where if you graduate from high school and then you get a full-time job and you get married before you have kids, that this is the path to success, that there's some prosperity there. And not that there's necessarily causation, right? Correlation doesn't equal causation, but there are some correlations that happen among those, each one of those steps. One of the issues, though, that kind of concerns us about the success sequence is that just because you graduate high school doesn't necessarily mean that you've learned a whole lot in many people's career or their studies throughout K through 12th grades, right? Because oftentimes they don't meet the unique needs of each one of those kids. For example, from kindergarten and second grade, I went to a small private school. Third grade and sixth grade, I went to public school. And seventh grade through 12th grade, I went to homeschool, right? Those were different, meeting the needs of my unique needs along the way. So we had a good audience question about this. How can allowing more incentive for school choice help impact young people's lives in the long run? And how might that influence the safety nets and the path to prosperity over time? Erin, I'd love to turn this question over to you.
This is a really good question. There's a larger picture I just want to emphasize. Parents are the first educator of their children, and they are responsible for their children's education. That is the bedrock that we believe here. I was actually homeschooled as well, Vance, so that's good to hear. Here's the situation. It used to be that vocational education had this reputation as being sort of a place where you put kids that couldn't make it in college, okay? And they were sometimes forcefully tracked into vocational education. This happened to my father, but it happened in a lot of communities. And it was because essentially those kids were given up on, and to some extent. And so the way that schools are set up is it's very locked into this either or mentality, right? That we've talked about before. It's either vocational or it's liberal arts. The thing that parental choice and empowering parents brings to the table to this conversation is that it takes that compulsion out of it. If a parent and a child who's 15 or 16 decide that they want to go ahead and put more emphasis on learning a skilled trade for the next couple of years, that is their That is their choice. They are empowered to do that, as opposed to having a school administrator tell them, you know what, kid, we don't think you can make it. Okay, that's a very different message. It's an empowering message to say, you know what, I think I want to learn this skill so that someday I can start a business, or I want to learn this skill so I can get this job and help my family business, or whatever it is, right? So it fits very well into this idea that parents know their children best, and they know what educational options will work best for them, whether that's focusing a little bit more of their time on a vocational efforts, or a little bit more of their time on purely academic, or some blend of the two that meets their unique needs. The system sometimes forces parents and students into an either or mentality, and I think that's part of the problem. There's a really neat example of a school that does this here in Texas. It's the Work Texas Trade School. It's operated out of Gallery Furniture, Mattress Max Place in Houston, and we actually have a video that we produced highlighting this school. And I encourage our viewers, if you'd like to check out the video. It should be in our notes, and it's definitely on our website. It really highlights the potential for empowering students and their families to make decisions about how they want their unique educational blend to come together. So I would really recommend you check that out.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I weigh in on that a little bit?
Of course.
Just piggyback a little bit off what my colleague is saying about, the stigmatization of tracking, just using that word in education. I've been in education for 30 years. Using that word in education has been, a stick in the mud. However, at the same time, we have been tracking, we've had a 2-track system for quite some time. That's, a track to higher ed and then a track to prison. And they call it the school to prison pipeline. And so, I mean, I tend to get a little excited about this because this is my soapbox. What I want to do is I want to close the school to prison pipeline. I want to open up the track to military, and I want to open up the track to careers. And so basically, and close the prison track. And so basically, don't be afraid of the word tracking simply because we're opening up. Now we call them pathways. A pathway to higher ed, a pathway to the military, a pathway to careers, but no pathway to prison should be in our public schools or in our school systems right now. And Erin hit the nail on the head. Parents know their children better than anybody. I have 4 children. And I know folks will say, well, Dr. Johnson, I love kids. Well, you're not going to love mine more than I love mine. You're not going to outlove me with my kids. Like I'm not going to outlove you with your kids. And so basically, if this choice, I have 2 kids that may be well to go on the pathway to higher ed, but I have a couple of other kids who may be well on the pathway to going into careers or the military. But I, as a parent, ought to be given that choice, that freedom, that right to, and those opportunities to find the best educational option for my child, and my resources ought to follow my child. That's just the bare facts. I know it's kind of blunt in your face kind of thing, but it is the bare facts on how we create a more successful student and not be in the business of creating more successful people on payroll.
I totally agree, Richard. And I think that there have been some good bills that are moving us in that direction this session when you're looking at education freedom overall. And hopefully those will gain some traction sooner rather than later. This session would be fantastic. Another bill that I was thinking about as y'all were talking was House Bill 3204, Chairman Dutton bill, where you have this career bonus. I think that's another good avenue to help out those who are going down the CTE path relative to the 4-year university or something else. Erin, maybe you want to say something?
Great. Yeah. So one of the ways that we're trying to bring the outcomes piece more into focus, taking inspiration again from the return value funding model that I mentioned before, is actually just building on something that's already in the big education bill that was passed last session, HB3. This bill included college, career, and military readiness bonuses for school districts. And so One of the ways that we think that could be slightly improved on the career readiness side would be simply allowing school districts to take into account if students have found really, really good jobs after graduation. They ought to get credit for that. So if a student is employed above, say, the regional median wage 6 months after graduation, whether or not they've gotten an industry-based certificate or passed some random test or whatever, if they have that employment, the school district ought to get some credit for that, for finding a way to nurture that child's unique skills. So this is a way to sort of open it up and take it a little bit out of the sort of more bureaucratic approach, the box checking approach that a lot of these outcomes bonuses could potentially get bogged down in. So that's one way we're trying to think about how do we get schools to start thinking about their local communities, partnering with local employers, and finding those unique pathways for students.
All right, excellent. Well, I think whenever we're looking at that, hopefully, part of I was talking about this earlier, where maybe there's a path, thinking about these paths to getting stuck in those social safety nets, falling through the cracks somehow. And I think the work that y'all are really doing in this, whether it be our Next Generation Texas campaign or the Booker T. Washington initiative, I mean, those are key steps. I love that book, Booker T. Washington, Up From Slavery. I mean, there's just so much good stuff in there that I recommend our audience read that as soon as you can. It's really, really good. And so when we're thinking about these other safety nets, the other ones who may have already fallen in the cracks, Andrew, how can we try to improve those? We got a good audience question for this one as well. When functioning optimally, what is the ideal result of social programs? What do we really want there? And how can we better streamline the application process? I know there's been a bill, Senate Bill 224, that's talked about streamlining some of the SNAP, the food stamp type programs, which I think is a good step in the right direction. But what are some other things that you're looking at and what you might use as a measure to see whether or not they are functioning optimally?
Yeah. And I love that question. What's the ideal result, right? The ideal result is people become self-sufficient. They find meaningful work. They get married. They have kids. They raise their family. And then their kids grow up and they repeat that cycle just without having to go on the safety net first. And the ideal result of the social programs are we end the cycle of generational poverty and you quickly, effectively, and sustainably move people to self-sufficiency. And I think where we need to be focused, yes, obviously the streamlining and there's some excellent bills around there about streamlining and reducing bureaucracy around certain of these programs. But we need to change how we define the outcomes of success for the programs themselves. One prime example is unemployment benefits. With unemployment benefits, it's just a series of boxes getting checked. And just one example, in my wife's industry, it's a lot of solo practitioners or independent contractors. And she will have calls regularly, especially after COVID really rocked her industry, with people wanting to network and talk about any job opportunities that they've heard. And one of her colleagues set this call up basically saying, hey, I'm on unemployment benefits and I have to do conversations about finding a job. Can we talk for a few minutes and network? I know there's really nothing out there right now, but I have to have these conversations to continue collecting these unemployment benefits until the industry opens back up. In a previous life before coming to TPPF, I helped run a charity that worked within communities to address some of these poverty-related issues. And one of the things that we did was we partnered with places of worship in communities to have job fairs and to bring local employers in that community who maybe went to that church or were near that church around so that they could identify and hire highly skilled, capable people that live in their community. And one of the things that we saw time after time after time is you would have people come, they would register, they would either never show up or they would show up, fill out the little card that says they were there, do one lap and then leave. And as we talked to people and tried to build relationships with those that we were serving, one of the things we found out was, oh yeah, I just need this paperwork to give to the government agency so I could show them that I'm engaging in job search activities. We have reduced the result of finding sustainable employment to just going through the motions. And I think it goes back to that cultural issue that I've talked about, that one of the major issues is we have a safety net system that is paternalistic in nature. And we need to, as we're trying to solve those problems, we need to make sure that our solutions aren't repeating that same paternalistic approach to those that we're serving. And I'm kind of a disciple of the legendary Bob Woodson. And one of the problems that he highlights is elitism. We have professional providers that parachute in communities with the idea that we're going to come in and we're going to fix the problem. It's a paternalistic mindset. It says these communities don't have the resiliency, they don't have the ideas, they don't have the agency to be able to solve their own problems. And it's a complete and utter myth. Yeah. And so we need to be working on recognizing that those who are in communities that are in need have the capabilities in and of themselves and within their community, and allow them to create the solutions and to be the agents, to borrow from Mr. Woodson, to be the agents of their own uplift.
Yeah. That makes, I totally agree with that, Andrew. And so we're running out of time, unfortunately. We've had a great discussion here today. What I would like to do is give you each 30 seconds, kind of give your last minute, your last pitch before we go of what are the next steps that we can do, community, policy, whatever else it may be. I'll start with you, Erin.
The bills that we're working on that we want to highlight this session, if you're just going to look at the policy side, are going to be relating to work-based learning and paid work-based learning in particular. It's Representative Theory is carrying 1032. So if you're interested in looking at that, please follow that. Also, House Bill 3204, which is a Chairman Dutton bill. We're also looking at reducing barriers to employers working with community colleges. So we have a couple of bills related to that as well. And if you'd like more information, please let me know. But in general, I'd actually like to just sort of say it's a call to the leaders that are watching this. If you're watching this, you're interested in your community and seeing better results. And so what I would say is encourage the young people in your life to keep an open mind about what they want to do in their life and to try some things and maybe try getting some skills. Maybe they don't know it yet, but they might be interested, and try to remove the stigma around skilled trades and the possibilities there, because there really shouldn't be one. And, we can encourage students to grow up to be Renaissance men and women.
All right. Thank you, Erin. Andrew, final words?
We need to understand how these programs are actually functioning, and we need to understand the actual results that are being achieved. So House Bill 1516 by Representative Parker and its companion Senate Bill 657 by Senator Springer. That's the TANF efficiency audit bill that we talked about earlier. House Bill 1886 by Representative Noble and its companion Senate Bill 1138 by Senator Hughes would create an independent study that reports on the bureaucratic costs of running all of our safety net programs in the state and examine the benefits of streamlining them, making them more effective and focused on achieving actual results. And again, all of this, I think, comes back to redefining what success looks like, and then setting the outcomes and holding government and providers accountable to the real measurable outcomes that are linked to changing people's lives for the better.
Very good. And Richard, final comments for you.
Friends, we are in this fight, and we're going to win this fight. We need you to be bold, and we need you to be bold in your approach in carrying the narrative of self-sufficiency, self-reliance, independence, and we want you to fight until the bitter end to achieve this goal. At the end of the day, Booker T. Washington was right. it's better to lend every man a hand up and not a hand out. It's better to help a man stand on his own 2 feet with pride and with dignity and raise his family and not be dependent upon a government. And so with that being said, I'm asking you to enlist yourself in this fight along with my colleagues and I. You can reach us at the BookerTWashingtoninitiative.com, or you can reach us at keeptexastexan.com, or you can reach us at texaspolicy.com. There's many different ways to reach us and find out the information that we're on policies that we're supporting. We ask you to be bold and carry the narrative along with us. Thank you very much.
Well put, Richard. Thank you, audience, for joining us here today on this important discussion, and continue to do this. You can do this. We can all do this together. Let's continue the fight. Let's continue to help people out where we can, communities and individuals, and sometimes the government assistance as well. And this is what we really need to do. Thank you for your time today. Let's have a hand up instead of handouts. And God bless you, and God bless Texas.